Hello, I'm Marcia Ribot.
I am Patricia Rodriguez.
And together, we are Little Soldier Productions. We are foreign artists
based in the UK.
And over the last 10 years, we have made and toured work all over the world.
We love it, but it's not always been easy.
So we have invited our friends and collaborators who share the same passion.
And we have asked them what it's like for them and how they make it happen.
We want to know what gets lost in translation.
What can't they travel without?
And their best border control stories.
Welcome to They Make It Happen,
a series of online conversations about the ins and outs of making and touring work internationally. MAKEIT is a writer and director based in Dublin. He's joint artistic director of Dead Center.
With Dead Center, he has co-directed Balam's Fest in Germany, Alles was der Fall ist, an interpretation of dreams in Vienna, To Be a Machine version 1.0 at the Dublin Theatre Festival, Beckett's Room at the Gate Theatre, Shakespeare's last play at the Shabune, and Chekhov's first play for the Dublin Theatre Festival.
All Dead Center's work has toured internationally throughout Europe, Asia, Australia and North America. As a freelance director, his work include In the Night Time at the Gate Theatre, Derailed with Little Soldier Productions, Spring Awakening for Headlong, and The Shoal at the Young Vic.
Hello everybody, and welcome to They Make It Happen, an online series of conversations about international touring and international theatre making. And today, here we are Little Soldier Productions. I'm Marcia Ribot.
I'm Patricia.
And we have here our guest, Ben Keith. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you.
How are you, Ben?
I'm okay. I'm good. I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay. I just put my little daughter to bed. We have a baby. So if she starts crying, I apologize if you hear it.
Yes, don't worry.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm pretty good. How are you guys?
We're good. We are right now touring. You know, when people see this, we have just done this, like it's a time travel now. So how the show goes well. Tomorrow we are performing in Poole. Our show happens twice. Yeah.
So, Ben, thank you again for talking to us today. We have asked all our guests when they've come into these conversations a little bit more. We'd like to know a little bit more about their story and how they've become, in your case, director, dramaturg, and what captured their imaginations to kind of enter theatre and.
Yeah, I would like to know. I would like to know that. I would like to know that too. I don't know.
How does that happen?
Exactly. How did this happen, and why did this happen? That's what I don't know if you guys are the same, but I sometimes stop and just try and trace back and see where did it go wrong, what happened. I suppose I went to university and had absolutely no idea what I should do. And I was of a generation in the UK probably, and of a particular kind of, I suppose, demographic or social class or something that kind of, for whatever reason, I kind of thought, well, I should choose, what do I want to do? I should, the whole, I've spoken to people about this before, there's a whole bunch of people who, we all acted like we were rich, basically, like we were kind of like, sort of like Renaissance, like romantic poets who could just decide what they wanted to do. Actually, that turned out not to be true, and I probably should have got a proper job because I wasn't Byron and I didn't have this great big fortune to fall back on. So then you get to 40 and you're like, fuck. But I was of this kind of, I don't know, new Labour generation, I suppose, of sort of going like, well, what do you want to do? And I definitely never thought I want to do theatre because I have any particular belief or love for, not a great love for it, but I never had any sort of ideological or belief that this is the form, that this is the one thing to do, that this is the place, or that this is the form that I can use to say something. I just liked hanging around with the people, I suppose. And I guess so I trained to be an actor, and I wasn't very good at that. But I got chances to hang around with the people. And I just always loved and liked the way in which, when you're making theatre, it's this very strange process. And I think this is why I ended up moving into directing, into producing and having my own company, is because it's this very strange process whereby you assemble such a weird mix of people. Like you assemble like lighting designers and actors are just such different types of people. Not all, there's lots of different types of, but there's various different skill sets that you assemble, whether it's writers or puppeteers or sound technicians or, people to build the set. It's just this really strange and really exciting and weird form where you just assemble this weird team of various diverse people who've got really different skills, and you say, look, let's give ourselves a time limit to just make something that is the most extraordinary thing ever made in the history of humanity, because that's what we all think we're doing every time we make a show, right?
Of course.
It's completely insane, and like no other art form would set a time limit on yourself like this. It's like a painter or a sculptor wouldn't be like, oh shit, it's got to be finished by next Wednesday, so I'll just do it like this. It's this weird thing. And I just always found something magical and alchemical and exciting in the experience of being in those weird teams, those weird groups, in whatever sort of form I was in. So I didn't do very well with acting because I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't quite have the skill, but also the mental, emotional courage and the emotional strength that you need for that, I don't think, or indeed the physical strength and bravery, as you guys know, really, to be a performer. But I lingered around, and I definitely couldn't even imagine that there was any other place in the world or any other sort of any other project that I could be involved in that was quite so thrilling and quite so bizarre and quite so kind of uncool and like ridiculous, and like, because nobody comes really in the grand scheme of things. It's weird. It doesn't make any money. It loses money. It relies on subsidy. It's completely mad. It's kind of like a combination of high art and like really, really lowbrow entertainment, which I think that's what I always love, is the sort of connection of those two things. And it is just fundamentally a project and a process that can only happen when you engage and collaborate with this extraordinary wide network of weirdos who have really, really different, really complementary skills. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of amazing. Like if you're in a tech and there's like a playwright and a sort of, we've done lots of very sort of technically complicated work with the company, and a playwright and then a sort of engineer or something sitting in the same room, completely different sensibilities, but for a short period of time, all focused on making this weird thing that no one even really asked for. I don't know. This is kind of a weird answer, I suppose.
No.
So I kind of just fell into it and just kept wanting to find opportunities to go back into those rooms. And then gradually started to sort of think about, okay, what is this? What can this form do? I still to this day think that theatre is more fundamentally a little bit more thrilling and exciting than any other art form, probably. And I'm not quite sure why. I'd sort of scrabble around trying to answer that question, why, but I definitely believe it's true. It's something to do with the way theatre uses time and the way theatre uses human bodies and the way theatre kind of, we enter into the same time scale as each other, audience and performers, and we spend time together and all these things. Still, to me, it's the most versatile form of making art or entertainment. It's the most elastic, and it's the one which can contain the most different types of experience, I think. It's the only art form, I think, that I know of where it can go wrong and that can be cool. It doesn't quite make sense in a movie. You can't really have a mistake in a movie. You sort of can, but it's not quite the same. Whereas you're in a theatre, someone can forget their lines, and that's like the most thrilling thing in the world because it's an error. And like, you can't really have an error in a painting, or you can, but they chose to leave it in. So, whereas theatre has this inbuilt kind of unstableness or something. So I just kind of kept on looking for opportunities to be in theatre rooms, and then directing became the thing that you try to do. I was doing this living in London and trying to sort of hang around in the Young Vic bar and ask someone to give me a job, and that I had a great time and was fortunate to get a few opportunities to make some bits of work, but it often felt like a kind of very intimidating talent contest the whole of life. I know everyone would say that about working in theatre sometimes, but you were constantly, being a director, you're sort of constantly trying to prove yourself. This was a particular time, and maybe it was me more than the actual industry, but sort of like you always felt like this pressure to try and be the cleverest person in the room, but nevertheless, it was interesting, and I picked up lots of assistant directing experience, and I tried to forge a kind of taste and a kind of idea of the kind of work I could make. And then, like I say, made a few projects, kind of directed plays, I suppose, in the way that, never quite satisfactorily and never quite feeling that there was that much of myself in the work, or rather, if there was some of myself in it, there was never enough. And it always felt like, I remember someone saying to me once, if you're going to do this, if you're going to be as cocky and arrogant as to say, I want to leave the world something, I want to give the world something, then it should contain something of you. It should contain something of your fears and of your pain and of your doubts and of, to try and reach out in a way. So I sort of started becoming more interested in trying to make work that was a bit more personal, I guess, or not personal, but authored, I guess, something that, and I started making work in 10 years ago, actually. I started making work with a colleague, my colleague Bush, who I run a company with now. I don't know how you guys were, but we never sort of meant to become a company. It just became the obvious way to make another show after you've made one, and the company, I live in Dublin now, I only just moved here, but the company is based in Dublin, Ireland. We're actually both English, but we have a company called Dead Centre, and we have made work for 10 years. And I sort of carried on doing freelance directing with kind of various weirdos around the way for a few years, but don't really have time. You're like me, but I haven't done that for a while now, partly because, as you guys know, running a company becomes as much about booking hotel rooms as it does about making work, But we've been fortunate. We've had opportunities for the work to travel. We've made a whole bunch of shows that were kind of original works, I suppose, things that we either wrote or adapted very freely from texts. And it was really, really liberating for me. It's complicated to work in a partnership, and it's complicated to work, which we did for a long time, without any support from any real support from any buildings or organizations. And like, that's quite scary and it's hard, and means you work very hard and you get underpaid and stuff. We've been fortunate enough to be commissioned to make work by theatres in recent years, and that's a lot easier, although you lose a little bit of the control, a little bit of the artistic freedom, but nevertheless. But so much of our efforts and attentions go on the administration of running a company. Initially I kind of took to that. Then you kind of realize that you're not very good at it, and you're like, fucking hell, this is, I'm not doing this very well, and it's taking me away from being able to think about projects and stuff. So it's kind of
creative thing. So since you have touched on several aspects that relate to the theme of these talks, the online talks, which are based, as as Marcel said earlier, on international theatre making. We have been talking to people that either they are like migrant theatre artists that live outside their homelands, or people who tend to work a lot with people from different cultural backgrounds, or people who travel a lot with their work, or I don't know if moving to Ireland you consider yourself like migrant theatre artist. Yes, and I don't know, like what one of the questions that we do tend to ask, because for us it's an ever-changing term for us, international theatre making. So for you, what does it mean, that term?
Well, I mean, to start with, I certainly wouldn't, with my accent, telling Irish people that I was an immigrant theatre maker. That's not really what that's not really what the term's supposed to imply. When you are representative of the ruling empirical power that colonized their country for 300 years, you don't really get that. That's not really, that's a willful misunderstanding. And so, no, I'm not. I think, however, I will say there's something that Bush, who started the company with me, he's English too, and he was born in England, and he moved to Dublin to study. And then I came across here 10 years ago and didn't live here, but made the work here, and spent a lot of time here and stuff. And so this is, there's a lot of things you're talking about there, and in terms of other people that you are speaking to, which I would not be able to speak to, and I shouldn't try and claim that I'm, there's experiences and I'm sure practice which is informed by being a migrant maker or working with and trying to create international collaborations. I'll speak a little bit about working in other languages and stuff later, but yeah, so in many ways I would have to sort of say, yeah, I can't really claim to have the same type of set of experiences, but I suppose there definitely is something about not being from a place, which is quite liberating initially, I think, in terms of, I think the weird thing it did for us, or for me certainly, was, and I mean, if you ask people in Dublin, they probably wouldn't think our work was really about Ireland or the Irish experience. But actually, I think in quite weird, surprising ways, it actually has been and is. And I think we were able to make work. We made a show years ago, which we're about to do again in Dublin, actually, a show called Chekhov's First Play, which was far, far more than I think we realized at the time. It was kind of it was a real play about being a certain age in this city at this time, and certainly for me, I don't think I would have made that kind of work about my own country in a weird kind of way. I don't know why. I don't know what that means really, but I think there's something about being a blow-in, as the Irish would say, which does sort of allows me to sort of look at a culture, usually always very celebratorily actually, but in a way of you see a culture without having too much of an emotional involvement with it.
Yes.
Once you live in a place for a long time, that changes, of course, but you kind of go, interesting, this is how this is, you know what I mean? That sort of thing, in a way that certainly, and certainly I suppose there's also a thing about London. I think I'm not from London, but I lived in London I lived in London for 15 years. And I'm not from London, but I'm sort of part of this class of people in London who drifted into London. And I don't, and therefore sometimes I used to feel like, I don't know that I'm really part of this city in a really fundamental way. And that's on me, there's nothing to stop me being fundamentally I'm not part of the city in a way that I would have been part of the town I grew up in. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not really so I think, and I remember now looking back on the work I directed when I lived in the UK, it was hard to, it was a little bit placeless, if you know what I mean. It was a sort of metropolitan kind of theatre work. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of theatre that looked like theatre, And I'm not saying, that's not to suggest that the work we make now with Dead Centre is dramatically socially engaged and kind of all about, but nevertheless, I felt able to be a little bit more, I felt able to make cheeky jokes about life in Ireland and about, and able to engage with a kind of, what do I mean? A kind of like, cultural identity that I felt I didn't really feel I was in the UK. That was a dreadful answer, guys. I'm so sorry. It's
it's good because, it kind of says, what is my understanding? It gives you a perspective, like a different perspective, like sort of feeling a little bit like outsider that you can, have.
A little bit. Do you guys think that? Did you guys feel that about being in the UK?
Yeah, well, yes.
You've been in the UK for a long time now, those of you who asked it.
It's got pros and cons. Like, I don't know how to, definitely our, experience is also to do with a language, accent. We do have that. And in terms of work, as you know, like you remember when we did the rail, for instance, we used that moment in which, we were told off for demonstrating, go to your country to demonstrate. We were able to tell these stories, our experiences as
I think one of the really interesting things that seems to be happening now, which is bizarre. I remember thinking this a long time ago, like, isn't it weird the way, for example, you would never really see a play in a mainstream theatre in the UK, in London, let's say, that was like in Polish. But there's fucking loads of Polish people living in London, you know, who might go and see that show. And God forbid, English-speaking people might also go and see that show. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, and there's been it's taken London sort of quite a long time to kind of, but I think it is happening a little bit more now to sort of, you know, you would very rarely actually, at, say, the National or like a mainstream theatre, you would very rarely hear a person speaking in English who didn't have English as their first language.
With an accent. Yeah, and that's something that we've been talking about like for years. Like, there is no, but I think it, like, in terms of, I feel like other countries are much more but when we've talked, especially when we've talked to people living in other countries, like in Spain or in Germany, you see work in English, you see work in German, you see work in other languages, which doesn't, like, you know, as you're saying, that's not really happen in the UK. Therefore.
But it's so weird, like, you know, you go to watch a show at the National Theatre, not that I've been for a long time, and I think it is changing, but like, you know, nobody on the stage has got an accent from anywhere apart from maybe Americans and Irish people, but no one.
Unless the play is based on,
I guess so.
Or therefore is the convention is allowed.
Exactly. But like a Shakespeare play or something, and then you'd leave the theatre and like there's people speaking with certainly European accents and accents from all over the world, speaking English in those accents everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's one of the many ways that theatre is quite bad at being reflective of the world that it's in. Because, and there's an interesting kind of, you talk about other countries, we've made 3 shows, about to make another show in Vienna, and the theatre in Vienna, like almost all theatres in Germany and Austria and elsewhere, has an ensemble of actors, and so they have like 50 or 60 actors. Actually, it's a huge ensemble of actors, and it's just, I mean, it's so fascinating how the difference that makes to the kind of work you make and what your work is like and stuff. You could talk all night about it. It creates a totally different type of engagement with the work and stuff. And there's something really problematic about the ensemble system, because it means that you're stuck with the actors you've got, if you know what I mean. So if you want to do it, if you want to make a production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom or something like an August Wilson play, if you need 13 black actors, if you don't have 13 black actors in your ensemble, then you have to hire them in, and that's kind of complicated, because so the ensemble is quite a tricky thing, and it's quite complicated for those theatres to be honest about how they're going to sort of talk about the modern world. But one of the things that you notice, I only noticed it once when I went to see a show, and the cast, they all were acting in German, because it's a German-speaking theatre and it's a German-speaking country. But there was a whole bit where they introduced themselves, and one of them was Ukrainian, actually, one of them was Hungarian, one of them was Czech. It's in Vienna, so the rest of them were Austrian and one German. But they all spoke in German, presumably heavily accented. I couldn't tell because I don't speak German, but presumably heavily accented. And they spoke about who they were, and there was a kind of meta bit of joking about that sort of thing. And I was like, you would just, for some reason, Europe maybe being a landmass and migration in Europe being easier and stuff, and the UK having long historical kind of aversions to migration, as we then figured out in 2016, like maybe that's affected it. But it did seem really weird. You know, I remember going to see a play once, and there was somebody, I can't remember, I think she had a Spanish accent, so I don't know if she was from Spain or from South America, and she was just playing a part in a play, and the character wasn't from that part of the world, because that wasn't the theatrical language of the piece. But I was like, oh wow, oh yeah, I never see that. You literally never see that. You know, and there's a real kind of, because I think what's really thrilling about your guys' work is the way in which you engage with language, and with how language mediates between who you are and where you are and stuff. So the show we made and the show we worked on, Marseille, where I guess we met, I guess it's this language becomes this really significant part of your engagement with the culture or something. Anyway, look, yeah, God.
Definitely. And I think, like, for us now, thinking about translating the show that we are doing, it's got a lot of content in Spanish and in English with subtitles, and we kind of swap languages. And how do we now translate, like, thinking about touring it internationally, you know, like, is a big, it's, you know, there's a lot of thought in process of how that is going to translate, especially for Spanish audiences, and what, you know, like all the jokes that we have and all that, you know, when we make the work, it's so important the place you make it, because then, you know, like, and the perspective, the hat that you have on, like the knock-on effect that does have. And I was wondering, if we working in different languages, how is that process? And also with the work with that center when you take it abroad. I know it's like a big, like there's a lot of questions in this question.
Well, I can be a little bit more, you know, I'm on safer ground in terms of talking about internationalism, because like I say, what you were talking about earlier, I'd feel a little bit of a fraud if I was sort of trying to think of myself as a migrant theatre maker, or indeed an international theatre maker in the way that you guys are. I'm not. It's not the same, really, because I am making work in a similar culture to the one I'm from, really. But what we've been very fortunate to be able to do is to travel the work, is to tour. And even before that, I think I was definitely, you grow up going to the theatre in England, and really, if you've got your eyes open, you know it's not quite right. You know there's something going wrong here. You know that it doesn't have to be this boring, does it? Not all the time. You know, when you go to the theatre at school and stuff like that, which is not to say I didn't fall in love with theatre as a kid, I did, you know, but you're like, especially as you get older, you're like, huh? And then things just pique you, you know. For me, going to Edinburgh when I was a student and seeing the work in what used to be St. Stephen's Church, remember that old church down the new town, and I don't know if it's still a venue, but seeing the work in, I forget, Aurora Nova, they used to call it, the festival there, and seeing work from Russia and Hungary, and mostly quite sort of visual work and work that would fit into a kind of, into that sort of, and just being blown away at what theatre could be. You know, like, oh, it doesn't have to always have talking. Weird. Oh, it doesn't have to always have stories. Oh, weird. Oh, it can make you go, oh, I didn't realize it can make you go, oh, or rather I did, but it didn't do that much. Did that like twice maybe, or once ever, you know, and like there was an awful lot of until you got to the, oh, you know, but then you start to see work and you go, you know, and the simple fact is that the really annoying thing about theatre is, unlike films, it's really hard to fucking see it, because you have to go to the place where it's on, basically, you know what I mean? And you know, if you want to be a filmmaker, you can watch every film ever made. Like, if you want, they're available, basically, you know, and you can immerse yourself in it. Whereas theatre, you are at the mercy of where you happen to live and where you happen to be. And we can't all just spend thousands traveling around the world looking for work. But nevertheless, I definitely did get a feeling of like the liberation that you found. First of all, theatre allowing you to get to know a culture, take a flavor of just so thrilling. You know what I mean? Like there's this company, I think you pronounce it Dereva. We used to call them Derivo. I don't know if they still exist. They're a Russian, it's I don't know, mime company, physical theatre company, dealing in sort of exquisite high art kind of imagery. You know, and you sort of went and you were like, and you're just like, obviously I didn't know anything about the history of theatre or the history of, you know, Russian expressionistic theatre or anything, but I was just like, it's so thrilling to sort of see this is an opening into a culture. It's opening into a whole world, because this is how you tell stories. Like, oh my God, you know what I mean? And it's poetry, you know, and that's not something that the British theatre industry has always specialised in, kind of daring for theatre to be a poem, to be a poem doesn't refer to the world, a poem just is. It's just a thing of beauty, and daring to sort of think about theatre not as a play about something or a play about the Labour Party or whatever, but as a thing that just dares to transcend. And so you start to sort of, and so when we started making work with Dead Centre, we shared a desire to try and draw our influences and our inspirations from everything we'd ever seen, and to try and see as much of it as possible. And certainly to try and do something which I think happens outside of English language speaking countries much more, which is not so much about making visual work as such, or that's how it's shorthanded, but like interesting what you're just saying about trying to retranslate your show now back from, you know, into for a Spanish audience, then for another audience. Everybody, most of the people who make work around Europe, let's say, they all do probably speak a bit of English, right? And they all know they have to live in this hellish global English world where everybody has to, and it's sort of just, you know, so they can kind of, and then so but they also know there's more of a sense of an interrogation of why language exists in a piece. Why are we talking? You know, why is anyone on stage talking? Like, what's going on? You know, and if you think of your work as potentially having to play to other people who don't speak your language, you know, then you have to sort of go, okay, well, why is this person talking? And that for us was always also just a liberational, and this is something that Bush, my colleague, kind of was inspired by, and we sort of figured out together a little bit. It's kind of like, you can't just have someone start talking. Who are they talking to, and what they're talking about, and where have they come from, and who the hell are they? You know what I mean? And we always get used to it. Certainly growing up in the UK, a play is, it starts and the lights come up and it's a kitchen or something, and the door opens and someone comes in with a bag and they put it down and they go, all right. And then someone says, where have you been? And you're like, what the fuck is going on? Who are you talking to? Like, what's going on? And on one hand, it was a simple thing of like, why aren't they talking to me? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? But also just a more of an interrogation about language and who's talking and why. Why is someone speaking? And that for us is always that we always have to figure out, and that I think comes from having seen a lot of work that didn't just take speaking for granted, because it was work that knew it wanted to speak to a wider world and to speak internationally. And so, that was always an inspiration for our work. And also, like I say, inspiration is just to take inspiration from everywhere, to realize that theatre is, like I was saying before, I think it's the most versatile and expressive form. It can be anything. It can be so many things. You don't have to feel trapped at all in convention. And you have to not. You have to always be asking yourself, why is this unique? Why is this blah, 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 And so we always were inspired by that. And also working in Dublin is a lot more of because it's a smaller culture than the UK. The theatre scene is tiny. The city is smaller. The country is much, much smaller. A lot of theatre makers of ambition and who care about their work always know that they have to try and get it out of the country if possible, if it's going to see an audience. You can make a show in the UK and you can never leave London and it can be seen by thousands and thousands of people, and that's great, and I think most theatre makers do instinctively want to try and have conversations with lots of different big audiences, try and make a rich. But in the UK, you don't need to travel to do that necessarily. And so lots of companies and organizations in the UK just don't travel. And we wanted to. We were helped by some really fantastic people here, a guy who runs Dublin Theatre Festival, who put us in touch with networks of co-producers in different countries. And we just pushed it. We tried to get the work on the road. There's big governmental support for travelling theatre in Ireland. Okay. They're really keen to allow culture to spread. Culture's a big industry for the Irish, and they're really serious about the culture being
traveling,
disseminated, throughout the world and stuff. So we were helped by that. And also just a desire to, because if you show your work, yourselves, if you show your work somewhere else other than it was made, alongside people from around the world, there's nothing like it. You feel humbled. You feel like, well, we're not good enough to be here with these people. Fucking hell. You go and see their work and you go, I'm so embarrassed that my show's on in the same festival as this. Like, this is so good. And it's so interesting and strange. And that then continues your conversation, your artistic conversation. You realize I think with theatre, the thing I was saying before about you can't see very much of it. When you start making theatre, I think you've only seen the theatre from where you grew up, let's say. So you think, I'm good, right? I'm as good as that. I'm probably better than that.
Did you watch a lot? Like, that's what did you watch a lot of theatre when you were growing up? Is it
not really when I was growing up?
You made more theatre than you actually watched?
Probably the way I started doing it was like doing, my mum took me to like a speech and drama local lady, just a little lady in a little basement who we have like speech and drama exams where you kind of learn a poem and stuff and you perform it and like you get marks and then you do a little scene, and they did like a pantomime every year and stuff. So it was really that's where I will have got connected to it. We would have gone to see stuff, you know what I mean? My parents would have tried to take me to see stuff probably, and school, you would have gone to see stuff, and I think looking back on it was mostly dreadful, but yourself, like, for a while, the thrill and the excitement, and I don't mind admitting this, of just being in those spaces, especially bigger theatres, that gets you there, that's enough. I remember I grew up quite near Sheffield, and we would go to the Crucible in Sheffield a lot, and just sort of walking in and sort of the vibe. And as we all really know about theatre, the sneaky truth is that what goes on the stage is maybe important. It's not that important. The amazing thing, and that space in Sheffield is a good example of this, is just all the other people that are there. Like, it's extraordinary. You're like, look at these fucking people, you know, and that space is this almost in the round. It's like a, you know, amphitheater, and you're kind of like, there's something so electric about being in those spaces. So I think growing up, I liked going to the theatre, like if my mum and dad would take me, not necessarily for what you saw on the stage, but just for the thrill of being there. You know, if you've been to the Globe in London, I'm sure, like, I never liked the plays. You know, it was always seemed like a really bad idea to be those plays that they do. It's kind of horrible. But my God, being in that space, just with all those people, even though they were all American tourists, and I worked there once and I stood on the stage. I don't know if you ever stood on the stage at the Globe, but it's like so cool. Like, I stood on the stage, it wasn't a full house, but there was only like a whole bunch of people around. You know, this is the best seat in the house. This is amazing. This is genuinely, you know, fundamentally, because that's the sort of, you know, that you know, we made a show in lockdown. It's like a streamed show where we kind of uploaded the audience into a kind of installation on iPads in a theatre. And, you know, what was really fun was, you know, we were having a bit of a joke with the sentimental love of being together in an audience, but it is true. You know what I mean? The thing that we missed was all these other souls in the same room as us doing the same thing together for an hour and a half. Like, so weird. Like, you know, you know? And so, yeah, that I don't think I was inspired. Then I got a bit older and was like, you see one or two things that kind of thrill you, and you go, oh my God, I have to keep going. I have to keep finding this stuff, you know, finding the best stuff. So yeah, and then we made work, and then we took it to some festivals, and that was great. And then so you asked about working in another language as well. And we were asked to make a show in Germany, in Berlin, and we've since made shows in Vienna, and Bush just made a show in Gothenburg. I didn't go. And obviously the first thing to say is everybody fucking speaks English. So, like, functionally, the room works in English, and that's shameful on my part. I was about to say on our part, as though I was talking to two English people, but I'm not. I'm talking to two incredibly skilled bilinguists. I don't know if you're just bilinguist. You speak any other languages?
A little bit of Catalan.
Yeah, Catalan, of course.
That's given. That's given.
Of course, yeah, but still, you know. So it's embarrassing and shameful, you know.
I mean, my partner is Swedish, and we have been together 10 years, and it's embarrassing that I don't speak Swedish. That is embarrassing, you know. That's
you were living in another country from the country you came from, but you had English to master, you know.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, but
so difficult.
So it's kind of, you know, people like, and the actors, it's kind of funny. We made the show in Berlin, and all the actors had English like fluent. They're like as good as you, like fluent English, you know. And there was one guy who didn't speak a word of English. It was hilarious. He's 80 because he's in his 60s. I mean, he could say hello and stuff, but like, it's in Germany, especially, I think it's true a lot in Europe, but in Germany, it's a big generational thing. Like, for a certain generation, the English teaching just, I guess, was a bit more thorough. So functionally, but it does make a huge difference to, you know, the work we make. We write the work mostly, basically, in collaboration with other people. So the job of translating it is a real fucking heartache and kills you, and it's so complicated. The working methods are really hard because you can't go home and write something and the next day work on it because it's translated. So it's all this, the whole thing becomes a real headache. But you do you're liberated completely from that thing of going, don't say that line like that, say it like that. You know, when you're working in your own language, you know, certainly I used to tie myself in knots with like, why is she saying put it over there? It should be put it over there. And, you know, you try and you go mad. You get into a sort of Kafkaesque situation with an actor where you're trying to tell them how to say a word, you know. And when you're working in another language, you can't do any of that because I know what that line means, but I don't even really know which words mean which bits. So you just...
So you don't know what the stress is.
You become more just interested in the whole piece and how the piece fits together, you know what I mean? And that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because there's probably English in most of the shows we've done in German-speaking world, because English, it's one of the great privileges of being elsewhere in Europe. They have English too. Do you know what I mean? And they can work in English, and you can have pop songs in English because they have this, they're conversant in English culture in a way that we're just not with any other culture, really, you know, for most English people. And it's a really rich element of a lot of, certainly in my experience, of a lot of European theatre cultures, that you can have text in English and it means something. Even people who don't speak English, they're so used to seeing parking,
Yeah.
whatever. Do you know what I mean? You know,
Yeah.
English as the semiotics of English anyway. So yeah, what else? I don't know.
There was it was another question about language, but yeah, and language and technology, and how you use a lot of technology, and is that helping you to buy, because you make the work with that idea of taking it out? Is the technology helping you bypassing language or not, or is it another vehicle? And yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I do go. I've been around the way watching work overseas that is very, very linguistic and language based, and yet still is very successful in other cultures. I think a lot of forced entertainment's work is very, not so much what I mean, but some of it is very linguistic and language based, and a lot of it isn't. I'll just take them as an example because they're a company who are very successful in different cultures, and the work is loved in different cultures. And it's not like they're having to do lots of big visual things to kind of, but having said that, yes, I do think there's a few things. I think our work has probably been, I don't know, actually. I think, to be honest, if I'm honest, actually, one of the things that I think people have connected with our work, people who liked it, and programmers who might have booked it and stuff, has been about the way work feels when it is made by an independent group of people. Like, we've made, for most of our careers, I'm thinking about Dead Center now, nobody has given a shit about our work being good apart from us, because we've made work in festivals, basically. We've opened the work in festivals in Dublin. And I'm being a bit dramatic there, because obviously the people who run the festival would like it to be good, but at the same time, they didn't really commission you. They're just hosting you. So they're not coming into rehearsals and being like, can I see a run through? If it was rubbish, we would be the only people who really suffered. Do you know what I mean? And when people haven't liked it, we're the only people who haven't liked it. And that can be quite stressful, but also it's allowed us to really try and you feel a responsibility, I think, to the people, to some people who might come back having seen something before. They might come back, you feel responsible, you need to have moved on. You need to
innovate.
You need to have moved on, innovated. You can't repeat yourself, but you need to also be, I think it's allowed us to be asking the same questions, because we've also repeated, we've interrogated ideas more than once. We've worked with audience members on stage a couple of times, and it's something that we try to go further with it the next time. You know what I mean? Because as an independent company, you are really aware that this is our, I hate to say things like this is our brand. It's not like that at all, but like, this is our soul. You know what I mean? This is what people might think of when they think about a show by us. Do you know what I mean? This is kind of who we are. So it's kind of like, God, I can't even remember what the question was now, but yeah, about technology and stuff. Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure in a way, you make a show with a big video screen at the back. It's kind of, but I guess for us, it's more, when we made the first show was a show that Bush wrote and I directed and he was in. But then we made a show called Lippy, which is our second show, and the first show that we really managed to tour and got on the road. And that show was really instructive for me when we were writing it. Bush kind of wrote most of it, but then we sort of assembled it together on the page. And the words people said were no more or less important than the stage directions, I suppose, and the descriptions of, how far away is that screen from those chairs, and how long does it take this to come up, and then where's this bin bag, and when does that move, and we then developed a kind of process which is actually very script based. We sometimes improvise and stuff in the room, and we write in response to people's work and stuff like that, but we're very, very script based. But I think what our scripts are like, which is why they're quite unpleasant to read, I think, is that they contain everything, and I think, I'm thinking of a show that we did with a big video screen at the back. We've done a few shows with big video screens, but like, you agonize over where that screen is and what's on it and why, just as much as you agonize over the first line that the person will say, because I think that's again, what you always try to do is to make something. And I think this is something that you see a lot more in international work than in British work. But I think also it's something you see in work that you don't know. When you go, if you ever went, I remember the first time I went to Berlin and watched a few shows, and you're like, oh my God, it's amazing. And partly that's because I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. I think there's lots of really interesting things that happen in the German theatre culture. I think the acting is interesting and different from what we're used to. But a lot of it is just, it's different. And you don't know how they did it because you don't know anything about the culture. When you learn a bit more about the culture, whereas you've grown up in your own country, and oh God, they just cast him because he was in the play. It's so boring. And so what you're always trying to do is so when you see the work from elsewhere, it just feels holistic because you're like, that has just emerged. I don't know how they made it. I don't know where they made that. If you lived there and you got to know the culture, okay, it's boring. He does the same thing in every show. That actress is always the same. They just cast her because blah, blah, blah. When you see stuff that is amazing, and we've always tried to create for the audience a kind of a holistic experience, something, because when you know theatre, I know how it works in England. I know what happens. The Royal Court have a really cool play they really want to produce, and they need someone to direct it. And then either the director just what often happens is, even in the best case scenario, the director's really brilliant. They've got a really cool idea for this play, but the writer says, well, that wasn't really my idea when I wrote the play, but cool, go for it, set it on a submarine if you want. And often, not always, I shouldn't say rude things about theatres. I've not been to the Royal Court for about 10 years. I don't know. But the culture of putting on plays, if you're not brilliant, and a lot of people are, so it doesn't happen like this. If you're not brilliant, it leads to work where you can really see the production and the play, and you can go like,
the ideas, the concepts.
And I'm all for concepts, but it's really hard, I think, to kind of allow for those two things to be inseparable. And what we aim for in our work is that it's not that no one could go. I mean, I'd love it if people did go, can we do another production of your play in America for 6 months? Great, thanks. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But probably people would never think to do that because they're like, well, that's just what those weirdos did. You know what I mean? And that's the dream. This isn't really about internationalness, is it? You did ask about technology and whether
it's like we've touched on a lot of aspects. And if we had more time, there's a lot more that we wanted. That it's that to talk about in terms of how how you travel with the shows and lots of other aspects, and probably maybe the most boring aspects of producing, which we let's maybe park those aspects.
I mean, you might be right.
But let's
I certainly don't mind saying the boring things because they're really, really
no, boring is boring.
They are very, very important. Like the practicality of.
But one of the things that we always ask at the end of our online talks is because these talks are very useful for young students as well, students of drama and universities. And let's call it top tips?
No, I wanted to know the worst advice.
The worst
advice you were ever given. The worst advice. If you can think of it. So, or you can give the best as well.
Or
you
can give advice as well. Like either.
Because advice is like it's always.
I don't know. I think that I was once. It wasn't really advice, it was more notes and criticism.
Yeah.
Where someone once said to me, and they were feeding back on a rehearsal and some work I was working on, and their intention was clear and sound to make the work better. But they didn't think I'd done a very good job with it. And they said something like they said, this isn't quite working. And you really need to do this, this, and this, because that's what directing is. It's da-da-da-da. And I think for that person, they had a really clear idea of what directing is, and it's really hard to give other people notes on their work because you can't be them. So you don't know what their ambitions are and their intentions are. And people who are, it's really, really, certainly don't have it. And it's a really great skill to have to be able to give another artist work. But it really hurt me, that comment, because I felt, and I still feel, that I'm not a very good director, sort of, especially in a particularly classical sense, And I think the person who gave me that tip, and not tip, but note. Basically the note was, you're not doing this, and that's what directing is. You're not even really directing. And like I say, that person might have had a point, and they might have been, and they certainly came from a good place of wanting to try, and they were a bit rough with me, but they wanted to try and make an improvement. But it was terrible, I think, on reflection. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, you must never like restrain yourself, or what do I mean? Like, you can never make a prison for yourself about thinking that there is a way of doing this, because that's to really make a mistake. Like, there is a way of efficiently and correctly organizing an Amazon warehouse, right? There just is. There's one way that will be better than another way, because the outcome you're looking for is clear. It's cheapest way to get as many packages out the door, whatever it might be. Yeah. We're not, and not just an Amazon warehouse. There's also a clear way probably to organize a, corporate law firm. There just is. There will be a better and a worse way to do it. That's not the game we're in. There is no surefire better way to do this and to not do this. And and this isn't the fault of the person who gave me that note, but I interpreted that as being, there's a way of doing this, to do this, and I don't know it, and I'm not good, and I'm trying, but I keep failing at it. And we have to be careful not to overemphasize the importance of what we do, because as I've said many times, no one comes in the grand scheme of things. Like look at the Spider-Man movie. Loads of people are going. No one is going to our stuff, and that's not to suggest that work can't have a really significant and transformative social and public impact. It can, of course, but nevertheless, we're not big enough, and we're not popular enough, and we're not fundamentally important enough to get worried about professionalism and to get bogged down in kind of, well, you don't know how to do it. The only liberating thing, and it's one of the hardest things to get and to give to people, because it's often something that it's often to do with people's background and upbringing and where they're from and what they think art is. But the only liberating thing you can get is confidence to be daring to say that you're a unique individual person, and you will just try to impart some of your unique individuality before you die, to make some work, even just to make a moment that is heartrending, So you must. I don't know if that's clear what I was saying, but but it's super hard. It's super hard to say. You can tell someone, be more unique, be more individual, just trust yourself. It's actually very, very hard to trust your taste and to trust your ability to do it, because you'll make a fuck up all the time. You'll make so many mistakes. You'll do it badly, and you'll be dissatisfied with yourself. So you've got to try and it's hard, and the culture doesn't help us. And they've just done a thing here in Dublin, actually in Ireland, which is kind of extraordinary. It's a trial for 3 years of universal basic income for artists.
Ah, yes.
So 2,000 people are going to, you apply, it's like a lottery, but 2,000 people will get €325 a week regardless. They can work on top of it, they can do whatever, but they will just get it for 3 years regardless, And it's kind of amazing. It's kind of bizarre. It's extraordinary, There's a similar sort of thing in France, isn't there? I think if you register as an artist, when you're not working, you get some, I don't know if they have anything in Spain or...
No. In Spain, no. In Spain, that is another talk altogether.
We're going to go to Spain. We're going to go for our first time. We're going to tour to Madrid.
Oh my God! When would you go?
Matadero.
When would you go?
Well, this is for another talk. We were going to go in April 2020, and in February 2020, we were in end of February in rehearsals, and it was an old show. It was a show Hamlet with a little kid in it. And so we had to find a new boy. This theatre really wanted the show, so they were paying us loads of money, because we said, look, we hope the boy's too old. We don't have a boy anymore. And it's really expensive, that show, to tour, to rehearse, because with an adult, you can give them the script and say, learn that. We'll do 3 days rehearsal. We're fine, But with an 11-year-old, it doesn't really work like that. So we had to have 3 weeks rehearsal. It's a big video show as well, so we had to hire a projector, blah, 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 But they were good. They were giving us a load of money, They said, that's fine. Okay, fuck it, we'll do it, And the pandemic started happening, and they were crazy. They were saying, they were like, no, it's fine. And this was when Madrid was at its worst, you know what I mean? They were like, no, it's fine. And then last minute they were like, no. And then we rearranged for 21, and then last minute they cancel it as well. And so we probably won't go. It's really hard to tour to Spain. Like some of the legalities around contracts and stuff, and like public bodies. It seems we were never in Spain before, you know.
Yeah.
And so that would have been lovely to go, but we know it didn't work. So yeah.
Let me know if you need any help. Ben, it has been lovely talking to you. Like we could talk for years.
We had so many questions.
Yeah, because I spoke too much.
All these questions.
Are there any quick ones? No quick ones, no?
Yes.
Because when you say it could be useful, the only thing that really is useful is like facts, or like, is there any quick questions? Like, no, there's nothing like.
No. It's all
they're
like
all pretentious.
It's all like really, really interesting, and as well as we were saying, these talks, a lot of them are also for like people who are studying theatre, and they'll be like. So it's super brilliant.
It's so cool that you're doing it, man. Like, it's super cool and I think this is something that the pandemic has given us, that the trust that this is and like, if I'd have been able to do this, I'm not saying there's anyone who would give a fuck who I am, but if I'd have been able to access this kind of material, you know, like imagine like when I was 18 or something, you know, like
that's cool.
we would all give up, you know. Probably we wouldn't, probably because we all make it look so kind of fun and easy and glamorous, and you know, look at the travel lodge. And is it a travel lodge? Travel lodge. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
When is the next thing that we can? When is the next thing that is coming into the UK that people can see here? Is there?
That's a good question, and I don't think there's an answer to that question because there's nothing currently.
Okay. Or anywhere else in the world?
Dublin in June, which an old show. Then we'll have a new show probably in Dublin in October, and then we'll do a show in Vienna next year. But nothing in the UK. It's also really, really hard to go to the UK because people haven't got very much money in the UK and they don't really want to spend. We actually have toured quite a lot in the UK, but it's really complicated. We had to get money from the Arts Council England, and Battersea Arts Centre basically allowed it to happen. They just did a huge amount of work for us and helped us with applications and stuff. But none of the theatres in the UK they don't invest their money in bringing in touring work.
Yeah, that's
from overseas. It's really expensive. You know, so it's part of the UK model. They're looking to make new work. You know what I mean? And that's a slight difference in other places. You know what I mean? So, you know, but no, so nothing. I don't think. Maybe
okay, we'll come to Dublin.
We'll come to Dublin.
Dublin in June. It's a lovely place. Dublin in June. Or yeah, that's that.
Thank you so much,
guys. Do you have a performance tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow. This probably is kind of late, much late, like in a
of course, yeah. So don't buy your tickets for the performance tomorrow, guys, because
we'll be back with this.
A month ago.
Twice for sure.
Yeah. When will you do? Will you do London dates for that, or
we are in conversations? So
conversations. Well, let me know because I want to. I've not been back to London since the baby was born, but let me know, and I'll be there.
We'll go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, man.
Have a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.